Okay.
Good day, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. And it is from LabCo Employees Organization, where we look after your labor on behalf of various employers. Thank you, Evan, for addressing our client base and visitors on COVID-19 protocols. He is a health and safety specialist. I have to do the following disclaimer. We are recording the webinar, so please make sure that if you do not want your video to be present, that you just stop your video. This video recording will be available at a later stage, so you can just request a copy thereof from our office when you need. Evan, back to you then. So, first slide.
Thank you, Loretta. As we know, we've moved down to level 1, and you can go to the next slide as well. Since the 18th or the 19th of September, it's been the legislative requirements were released. So with regards to legal requirements, as you guys know, we're working with the Disaster Management Act regarding COVID, and that is the legislative requirements that we've got to adhere to at this stage until it becomes more permanent, and we'll talk about that later during the process of the webinar as well. So there's a link on the presentation available to get access to that legislative requirement. But we will just touch a couple of points. You can go to the next slide with regards to the legislative requirements. So first of all is going to in the summer or into spring. It's very convenient that we will be moving down to level 1 due to COVID. Most of what the knowns at this stage is that it's a virus, so flu-like symptoms, and I think we will be seeing less cases. I know we're in a drastic fall at this stage, but abroad there is actually a rise in cases as well. So as we know, there's a lot of information, but there's a lot of unsurety around COVID in various aspects. So in the next slide, we'll talk about point 66, which is the movement of persons. Just go to the next slide. So movement of persons are changing at level 1 between the curfew of 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock. And that is allowed for special cases. So there's an application document that you need to complete if you have people moving in between those time periods. And then point 67, they say mandatory protocols. So regarding our whole lockdown from level 5 to date, we have implemented a lot of protocols, policies, procedures, so that needs to be enforced. And then the well-known ones of sanitizing, wearing masks at all public places, then social distancing, and then hygiene in the workplace. So we need to still maintain that, and in public places as well. Then we can go to the next slide. So the only thing that basically changed is gatherings. There can be more people available. So that means funerals, weddings, all of those places. There can be more people. And they also specify where if it is in a closed building versus an outdoor facility. As we know, ventilation is a big aspect of managing COVID. So everything, if you can do it outdoors, the better for you guys. So factory environments in the workplace, you need to assess your ventilation regarding that versus your construction, where it's an outdoor activity, there's less risk regarding COVID. So that still requires that you need to do screening on a day-to-day basis. So regarding the symptoms and regarding the temperature checks, and just so that you know that some people that get exposed to sunlight for a longer period, like construction outdoor activities, people might come with higher temperatures, especially if they've done like jogging or various activities prior to going into the workplace. So rather isolate and do additional screening process before you chase the person away or show him away regarding that. So next slide, please. So legal requirements also, it says that you need to appoint a compliance officer. So this compliance officer needs to be what they refer to as competent. And this is an issue that we are sitting with in various debates as well regarding what is competence. So there is various courses available regarding COVID, but the idea is that a main member in the workplace is going to have the relevant training, and he needs to implement various procedures and policies within the workplace, and he will be referred to as the compliance officer. We can also appoint the screening officer, the individual that will screen each and every person coming in or leaving the workplace. And as you know, all of that needs to be recorded. So there is a few requirements with compliance officers, so that compliance aspects needs to be identified and be appointed as well. So there's got to be a physical appointment for that individual. And then you've got to show that he's competent to do that specific operational legal requirement. So certificates, make sure you train your people. Currently what's happening is Department of Labour is going to various companies, and we've had really a lot of audits going around. So we would recommend that you keep record of all of this legal requirements and all your documentation. So it doesn't mean if we move down from level 5 to 1, documentation can disappear or go out of the process. You still need to maintain and develop ongoing procedures. And I will talk about that in the legislative requirements as well, where it can come in. So we can go to the next slide. So offences and penalties. This is one thing that, with regards to COVID, companies are not taking for granted, is that there's actually offences and penalties for companies that doesn't comply, and to the point where they can actually close down your doors or your business. So without going into more detail, they like the occupational health and safety, they can do imprisonment or they can give fines. So that is the offences and penalties, and that is from case to case and from company to company as well, based on your risk level and the amount of offences that you as a company would have. So that is why we've got to basically rather implement compliance and force compliance within the workplace. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so a question that we get a lot of times is who's going to enforce this? So we always refer to the labour inspector, the individual that will randomly come and knock on your door and say they want to come and do audits. Currently, if an inspector comes to your your facility, he will have an ID card and he needs to have the relevant PPE. There's various debates with regards to, can I refuse an audit? The short and the sweet thing is actually you can't. If it's not, it depends on what the aim is of the audit, but at the end of the day is you need to assist the labor inspector as far as possible and try and be as kind as possible as well, because they might help you at the same stage as well. With regards to legislative requirements, inspector is appointed under Section 29 of the OSH Act, and regards to the Disaster Management Act, and Labour Inspector will also be appointed, and therefore they've got certain rights. So next slide. Then there's a big thing under the level 1 is this app, and I know there's a lot of negativity going around regarding the app. With regards to the POPI Act or the GDPR Act, that with regards to your safety and your personal information. So this is available on their website, that your personal information won't be shared and that it does not use your GPS locations and it doesn't have access to your contact list like what's going around at this stage. So this will be a requirement. I know if you're going to travel outside of borders, this will be a requirement as well. But also as a work procedure, you need to go and include that in your procedures. Say, for instance, you might have staff that is traveling around. This is something good to have. And at the end of the day is from HR point of view, if this is a procedure of a business, then we need to implement it. And unfortunately, if you have a business phone, then unfortunately you don't have a right to that because it's company property. So that will be maybe a requirement in different workplaces and requirement for people that travels quite a lot for their work purposes. Okay, next slide. So contact diagram, so isolation versus quarantine. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I just have a flow diagram, and the flow diagram is just to give you an indication to what we call a case, casual contact, and then basically a close contact. And the idea with that is just to indicate when you need to isolate and when you need to quarantine. So the difference between isolate and quarantine is isolate is you stay away. You basically go to your own facility, or a workplace will have an isolation room to keep you away from other employees. And then quarantine is basically you will stay at a designated area and you will try and not to get in contact with anyone for that 14 to 10 days. Okay. So the flow diagram is a good indicator to what to do in different situations. So questions that we get a lot is, my father got it and we live in the same household. Now, does that mean I need to isolate or does that mean I need to quarantine? And that is the process flow that will be followed versus close contact versus just actual contact in that case. So that will also be available on the presentation afterwards, but we can go to the next slide just to give you more information. So casual contact regarding that is if you have any of the symptoms, then what will happen is, unfortunately, you've got to be referred to a doctor. A doctor will be giving you a reference to go for testing. And then you will do the test, and then you've got to basically isolate for 2 days. That's plus minus the given time at this stage, and then until you get your result. So if you get your result and you're positive, then it's required to quarantine. So close contact, that is a different situation. So casual contact in regards to this is that my friend had it and we've been at a party, and there's an opportunity that I might have got COVID, where a close contact is basically I'm working with a colleague and I was exposed to him for more than 15 minutes in a building. So there's gotta be a point where you also investigate these contacts within your working environment, because there's different aspects that will be applicable regarding the mask that you are wearing. If it's a 3-ply mask, what is the time period that you've been in contact with that individual? And then that will also help with the contact tracing. So there's the actions as well, what to do regarding that. But the main idea is, as a employer, he needs to investigate, and we will explain to you the reason why as well after later in the slides. We can go to the next slide. So testing positive, that is when quarantine is required. So when a individual tests positive, that means he's got to quarantine, stay away from the date of testing, 14 days. So it depends on company to company procedure as well, but we always recommend 14 days. There's some companies that might take the risk and say we're going to quarantine for 10 days. It all depends on your procedures. There is some research at this stage that if you are positive for COVID, after 10 days you can't transmit it anymore or spread it anymore. So there is case studies available on the website that prove that just basically gives backing for that statement. And then we can go to the next page. So a lot of employers ask me, so individual COVID and who's going to pay for that? And this is where the workman's compensation comes in with regards to COVID and the claiming of workman's compensation. So if an individual got COVID at home, and that's why you've got to investigate this case. If an individual got COVID at home, say for instance, they got it from their spouse, and they come to work and then they transmit COVID to 3 other individuals. So what would happen is that individual that got it from home, you can't put a claim through for them, okay? But the other individuals that contracted it from that individual, you can put a claim through for them to where you can claim 75% of the salary, and also the testing that you are sent him or her to go and do. There's got to be a certain amount of documents that is required, and we can also assist with regards to the investigation and the contact tracing for this procedure, and also reporting this so that we can make sure you get the maximum out of that claim. Say for instance, an individual after a couple of days he passed away because of COVID-related issues, then you can claim that as well, and his family will be compensated, and a percentage of his funeral cost will be covered as well. yeah, and then we just, from the employer side, you need to make sure that it's been investigated and all the documentation has been completed, and you need to report it to the Department of Employment and Labour in 24 hours. So you've got to report it as soon as possible. Next slide. Legislation and protocols. So like we know, next slide, go back. We still need to maintain social distancing of 1.5 meters. So if you knew or you've put in cases where you've got to reassess your work platforms or your work areas, you always need to try and make sure that employees stays away 1.5 meters. A question that we get is, do I need to wear my mask at all times? We would recommend go and look at your risk, look at ventilation, go and look at various aspects within your work environment before you can give advice regarding wearing a mask at all times or work without a mask in your working environment. We can go to the next slide. So the main aim is always contractors, visitors, service providers. Until date, I know a lot of companies has worked on appointments only, but work has got to carry on. So when it comes to contractors, you as the employer needs to manage that contractor as well. And you need to make sure that that contractor and that visitor complies with the legal requirements and with social distancing and with the COVID rules of your work premises. So giving a contractor or visitor training is sometimes required if there's additional procedures and policies. And also ensuring that a visitor or contractor always have his masks on at all times. And this is part of the penalties is if an individual is caught without a mask in the workplace, they can issue the employer a penalty based on that as well, because it's basically breaking the laws. And then you need to also ensure that your workman's compensation or the contractor has got the required workman's compensation, or else you will be liable for that claim if someone contracts COVID in your working environment. Okay, next slide.
Evan, sorry, I just see on the context, the last bullet, the 37.2 agreement, what would that be?
Yes. So a 37.2 agreement is legislative rights that you as an employer usually signs with a contractor or a third party to basically put the risk on them. So as the employer, you also need to make sure that the 37.2 is signed by both parties, but you also have done the necessary steps to ensure that a contractor has got those protocols in place or procedures in place. So it's just the legal document to put the responsibility on it. Okay. Then hazardous biological agent. Okay, so next slide with that. So currently what's happening is the Disaster Management Act can only be implemented and enforced for a certain period, and it's been extended from level to level at this stage. So what is happening currently is on various platforms, we as safety specialists are giving input regarding the hazardous biological agent regulation. And this regulation is basically everything that we've been doing since level 5 until date. This regulation is going to become effective. So it's going to move away from your Disaster Management Act, and it's going to become a written regulation within the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So there's links as well if you feel like you want to have access to that first drafts at this stage, and go through that and basically align your procedures and policies around that, you're more than welcome. This is not the final version yet. According to what they suspect at this stage, is it will be implemented in end of October. So it's going for revision 2 now. So we will be seeing that effective end of October. Okay, next slide. Then awareness. So regarding the COVID, we talked about appointing the compliance officer. You can go to the next slide, Ludwig. But it also stipulates that the employer needs to always create awareness within the workplace. So awareness can be posters, it can be training, as long as it is documented. So what we would recommend is at least twice a week, at least do a toolbox talk. So some sort of information that you share amongst your employees regarding COVID, and not just COVID as a whole, but the mental side of it. And that's on the next slide. Mental well-being has been a big element within regards to this COVID situation, because people are working from home, they're not interacting on a day-to-day basis. And sadly enough, as working from home, you actually 24/7 gotta be you active and you interacting on work. So exhaustion is also happening at this stage. So there's various cases that we are aware of, that people with regards to mental well-being, different cases and different issues coming alight. So this is a big issue that from your HR department, your safety department, and your compliance officer, you need to communicate with your employees, create awareness around that. And if an individual is to the point where they might break, or they might, due to stress, financial stress, or various reasons, you need to indicate where there's those problems and react to that as soon as possible. Or else the claims against your company can be really, really bad. So, and those individuals that you know of, rather, I know that it's the element, a human element, but try and investigate it as well. Learn from it. That's why we do safety, is learn from our mistakes and improve on that. So if there's cases like that, get your HR or someone that they trust, interview that individual and get to the source of it before someone else gets affected by that as well. So mental well-being, health aspects, safety aspects, there's various aspects that you can create awareness around and do toolbox talks or additional training. Financial, this is a very bad financial situation that a lot of families are under. And you might be paying that individual, but you never know what the family is like. If maybe the father has been sitting without a job for a while, or various cases. So it's good to know those things as well, because it can have a impact on a employee's work relationship. Okay, next slide. Then this is just the various acts. At this stage is the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Since from October, we're going to implement that more. So part of health and safety, COVID is going to stay with us for a while, unfortunately. And I know a lot of companies like the spread is reducing, but unfortunately it is also seasonal. At this stage there's various health practitioners that advise us that if you have COVID, you after 4 months you might be able to get it again, or after a season. So it doesn't mean if you had it, you can't get it again. And that's why we need to enforce the screening, and we need to enforce that procedures and protocol is being taken. So as we know, the people that is at risk of COVID is unfortunately the unhealthy, the old people. And these are risk aspects to take in mind in your risk assessments. So in the work environment, you've got to assess your risks, and that is also a legal requirement under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and under the Disaster Management Act as well, that you've got to look at all your risks and put controls in place to manage these. Okay, and that's it from my side, and we'll open now for questions, and I hope I can answer the questions to the best of my capabilities, but we are all still learning through this process, and there's various cases that we get exposed to on a day-to-day basis as well. So each and every case is unique to itself.
Thank you.
Given.
Ready for your cross-examination?
Yes.
Okay, I've made a few notes from questions coming in. Air conditioning, good or bad?
So, like you see, my aircon is not on. So there is various air conditioning that is not good at this stage. And these typical, the one that is behind me, I would not recommend to put them on at all. Natural ventilation is a good thing regarding that. And the reason is this one has got a filter, and as air flows and circulate, the virus will actually get stuck there, or it might spread in your workspace as well. So if you have a medical grade filter, then I would say that's a good thing. Like your hospitals, that's a requirement for them. And the various shopping centers have also got medical grade filters. So those are the preferred ones.
I think you've just answered me why the courts and the CCMA is already so hot. Is because they're not switching on those numbers. Huh? Your screening records, now every place I go, whether it be a restaurant or CCMA, whatever, I write down my name, my ID number, my address, my temperature. So I take it that's a pretty standard protocol. How long do you need to keep those records?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, first of all, in any health and safety requirement, legislative requirement, is that you need to keep records for 5 years. So it would be applicable to this, except if you stipulate differently in your protocol. When it comes to health aspects, so say for instance, you send a person for a health screening or he had to go for a test, then you've got to keep that record for 40 years.
Okay. Long past our bedtime then.
Correct. And Ludwig, the reason being for that is if it's an individual in your workplace, so like we know at this stage, COVID is a respiratory disease, so it creates respiratory problems. So if, let's say for instance, I got COVID in the workplace and there is any complication, let's say 5 years, 10 years down the line, because of my complications, then it actually becomes a workman's compensation claim because you got exposed to that in the work environment. And that's why you've got to keep it for 40 years.
Your compliance officer must be a competent person, so there's no definition to that. But would it be safe to assume that your health and safety officer or health and safety officers would be an automatic choice for a compliance officer or a screening officer?
Okay, so that that's a good debate. In regards to compliance, you just need to be able to prove compliance. So it doesn't mean I'm a health and safety specialist, I know everything regarding COVID. So therefore, on our side, we do weekly webinars and seminars to always stay updated. So regarding that is you need to just show that that individual that has been appointed has done the required training or has got the required information to be able to do that specific task and to maintain that responsibility. So as we go down with levels, we need to always update that individual as well. And I found cases where they want the supervisor to be the COVID coordinator because he's working with these teams versus just a health and safety person.
I'll be honest with you, I find it mostly becomes the security guard at the gate, and basically that's what he does.
He might do the screening, but he needs to report to someone to make the decision if we allow the guy or do we rather send him home.
Okay. Department of Labor, when they come and do an inspection, what are they looking for? I mean, let's try and make it easy for them. What are they looking for?
Okay, so there's a whole requirement. It's about 15 things that they would, documentation-wise, that they will look for. And what we refer to a lot of times is the workplace plan. So they would ask for that to identify what your procedures, what is your policies within your working environment. And they're definitely going to ask you for the risk assessments. So have you identified the risks? Have you taken in account with the amount of people working in different situations? And have you also included social distancing and the health aspects as well? So, and then what competence? They definitely asked that. We had to prove the certificates and the content of the training to prove that the individual is competent in various audits. Then they would also go and interview employees to go and ask them if the company is providing PPE free of charge regarding that, if they're doing screening on a daily basis, and that the company is also providing the necessary resources. So those are the main things that they ask for. And usually they'll do it in various phases, but usually interview individuals as well separately.
Evan, if they were to pitch up the Department of Labor and they found something out of place, I mean, will they immediately shut down a factory and or a construction site?
Okay, so I won't say yes, they will. There's always that possibility. It depends on the risk. If it's a major risk, then yes. Let's say, for instance, we had a company regarding this. They weren't shut down, but they were given warnings or findings, and you have a limited time to rectify that. And it's usually when the individual goes and he does the screening or the COVID test and he comes back positive, then they do the contact tracing. And if you haven't done anything from a company point of view, then that is when Department of Labor will usually intervene. And if you don't have the required policies and risk assessments, control measures regarding COVID, then they will definitely intervene.
Thank you. And now, from a practical point of view, the fact that there's a 6 months jail time, just to the participants, you can't send a company to jail. You can only send natural people to jail. So that means that the CEO and or someone is at risk. So this is not a theoretical thing. It will come down to a natural person.
Correct. So regarding that, sorry, Ludwig, they will look at your appointment structure as well. So the CEO or the directors will automatically be liable. And then what we call your 16-2s and your COVID coordinators will be liable as well. So from management to supervisor level.
Okay. Then from Gracia, we've got a question. Working from home, is it still applicable or is it up to the company's discretion?
So currently it is, so you're allowed to have to a certain amount of employees on your work environment based on your risk as well. So your working environment's risk. So regarding that, it is preferred at this stage. And I know a lot of companies have taken that route, but if it is necessary to have that individual, then you need to take necessary steps to manage that risk as far as possible before you allow that person to come back. And provide training.
Even that brings up an interesting labor law question. So we've got companies, it is level 1. You might not be running full shifts yet, but let's say you have to run full shifts, or at least all your admin personnel must be present. So now you've got a person that is either by their own definition or by actual definition a high-risk candidate, an older person with one or more underlying health issues. And now can they refuse to come back to work?
Okay, so Ludwig, that's a very difficult question regarding to give a yes or no answer. First of all, what we will say is you need to assess your risk assessment, and then there's various legal requirements that they've got to look at in the labor side as well. But what we have done in the past is we would actually have a questionnaire for individuals, and again, it's got to be confidential information. So you've got to maintain that. And if you identify the individual like that, then you've got to assess the risk based on that individual's health risks and the environment that he's working from. I know there would be questions to be like, can you transfer that guy? If possible, rather do that than to ask the guy to stay away or basically retrench that individual. So I know you cannot discriminate against the individual as well, but you can look at the risk aspects of everything.
Now, even from a labor point of view, the answer to that is rather simple. If the person is sick and he's got a doctor's letter that says COVID-19, then it does become sick leave. This is a huge problem if you've got multiple people taking sick leave at the same time, but that would be one situation. But if a person is not sick, does not have a doctor's letter, does not have a positive COVID test, and they go under self-isolation, it is no work, no pay. That's the absolute starting point. And if they miss, if they want to self-isolate, but the employer cannot afford to keep that position open, it creates a serious clash. And of course, we will step in and handle that situation. Okay.
Correct. Ludwig, just basically on the individual that will stay away and isolate, he's got to at least prove that he's been in contact or close contact with the individual. That's where you've got to do your investigation from the company side. And if this individual is basically proven that he's taking shortcuts, if I can put it, or illegal steps, then you can take it to disciplinary procedures. But if he's been in contact and he didn't contract it from the workplace, he doesn't have any claim against workman's compensation.
Okay. Evan, so we also find it quite a lot that a individual, again, self-diagnosed or a real risk, that they kind of are prescriptive to the employer, stating that I will come back to work if you do these things, right? So there's only one protocol, and that's for everybody, right? Am I correct in saying that?
Correct, you are. If the company can only improve, if these requirements are going to help other individuals, then I feel it's we meet the person halfway. But if it's unnecessary requirements, then you can take it further regarding that as well.
Thank you. Any questions from the open field? I think I've fielded all the questions. If there are any questions, you can just post them on the chat. I'm not seeing any action there at the moment. So Evan, we can all go out for a nice cold beer.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan, for always being available and advising us. Just one last question. You do provide training, or do you provide training to
Correct.
Compliance officers and screening officers?
Correct. And to employees as well. So we would go out to workplaces and provide training to all individuals as well to create awareness around.
Thank you very much. Everybody, please be safe. And if you require a copy of the recording, you're more than welcome to ask so. Thank you very much, Evan.
Thank you very much, Leila.